Hello, everyone, and welcome to Catholic Mobilizing Network's webinar on how to write a letter to the editor. We are so excited to have Ms. Margot Friedman with us here today. Oh, hold on, I'm getting notice that we have a bit of an echo. Okay, I'm gonna mute myself, and then hopefully folks can still hear me with Margot sitting next to me, and we'll use her microphone. Okay, better now. Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Oh, technology. Fun for all of us. Never stressful at all. Okay, so before we begin, just a couple housekeeping items. We will have a question and answer section near the end of the webinar. So as we go through the content, talk about different ideas for the letters to the editor, and kind of tips and tricks. Be thinking of your questions. Feel free to write your questions in the Q&A box that's on the bottom of your screen. And we'll just kind of keep a running queue going. And then near the end of the webinar, when it's time for the Q&A, we'll get to those questions. And then, yes, we have the chat function here for, if you can't hear for some reason or there's like a technological issue, just go ahead and use that chat feature. And hopefully that will help mitigate any technological issues that we may have, which God knows with webinar, you just never know. You never know. So thanks for bearing with us in advance if there is any trouble. Okay, so officially let's begin. Welcome everybody. My name is Emma Tacky and I see many familiar names online. So thank you, my friends, for joining us. I am the Associate Director of Community Engagement for Catholic Mobilizing Network. And we are blessed and thrilled to have Margot Friedman with us today. Thank you, Margot, so much for joining us. We are in amazing hands right now. Margot Friedman is a communications expert and the principal of DuPont Circle Communications, which is a 15-year-old full-service communications firm specializing in writing opinion editorials for advocacy organizations. She's ghostwritten op-eds that were published in, just to name a few, the New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, Los Angeles Times, The Guardian, Boston Globe, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and so on. Margot facilitates workshops on opinion editorial writing, and we're thrilled to have you with us, Margot, on this webinar to share with folks the ins and outs of how to write a letter to the editor, what they mean, how they can be useful, and does it really matter if we write in LTE? Like, does it do any good? Spoiler, it does, yeah. So before we let Margot take over with her expertise, I just wanted to give a little bit of framework for why we're doing this webinar. As many of you know, I'm sure you've seen our emails and our newsletters with the resumption of federal executions beginning in December, the first one being December 9th with Daniel Lewis Lee, with 4 scheduled executions soon after. Voices opposing the death penalty, especially voices of faith, is as crucial as it's ever been in this moment. And we know the death penalty violates both the church's pro-life teaching and the teaching on the inherent dignity of the human person as created in the image and likeness of God. With the support of the church behind us, most recently the catechism revision last year in August, saying the death penalty is inadmissible in absolutely all circumstances, Catholics have a very important role to play in shifting the national narrative on the death penalty. We offer a moral voice that is often underutilized by other groups within the abolition movement. And lastly, Catholics are so well represented in public and judicial offices, making them key audiences to reach when it comes to policy and decision making. As many of you know, Attorney General William Barr, who announced the resumption of federal executions, is himself a practicing Catholic. So we have our work cut out for us in terms of using our voices to talk about the death penalty and to talk about why our faith compels us to work for its abolition. And with that, Margot, I will let you take it from here.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm really excited to do this, and I want to thank everybody out there on the webinar who is giving us an hour of their afternoon to participate in this really important work. And I do echo what Emma said, that so many of our elected officials, our appointed officials, our judges are Catholic or Catholic trained and they can really be moved by what you say. So that's why we're here, and that's why we appreciate your participation so much. I wanted to just start by asking out there, has anyone had success in writing and placing a letter to the editor in their community, not necessarily on the death penalty, but on any topic at all? And we'll give you a second if there's a couple of folks who have placed a letter. What was your experience doing that? What did you write about? How did you decide to do it? Did you just send the letter in? How did you get it placed?
And if folks just want to type in their response in the chat, that would be great. And I can share that out loud with folks, so everyone has a chance to hear. Oh, thank you, Patricia. We have Patricia saying that she has regularly submitted letters to the editor in her town in Illinois, and they've always been published. And she's written about pro-life issues going on 20 years now. And thank you we have Chris Castillo, also have written letters to the editor on the death penalty that have run in local newspapers and the Austin American Statesman. That is great, great. And Janice, thank you as well. Letters published in Richmond, Virginia. That's great. We have some old crows here. And Jen, thank you in Louisiana. Oh, you've asked other people to contact the volunteer coordinator for more letters to the editor options. So that is awesome. Great, great. And we've had a few high school students write and publish LTEs on abortion, another important pro-life issue. And that is fantastic. That's great. Oh, we've had that's a lot of examples.
So that's tremendous. So people are already off and running, and that's fantastic. So later when we get to question and answer, it doesn't have to be a question, right? If someone has a really good tip to give advice to everybody else, Emma can flag a real good tip, and so that we can do some sharing and cross-fertilization in the community. For those of you who are already writing and have already seen the impact, and for those of you who are just signing on to learn more and maybe do it for the first time, letters to the editor are really important for ending the death penalty. Oh, I think I'm supposed to be flipping here we go. Sorry about that, new to the system. Letters to the editor are really important because they are monitored by elected officials. Every elected official has a staff that scans their local papers, their local outlets, whether it's on Capitol Hill, whether it's in your state house. They have staff that is reading the papers, looking at the websites. They clip or send those links to the elected official. So these are being monitored. They want to know what you think, and the letter to the editor is another way to reach your elected official. They can reach a large audience. Obviously, they amplify support for abolition. The main thing here is if you read an article or read an editorial and something's missing, they miss something or they got it maybe wrong or not quite right, a letter to the editor is a way for you to raise facts and arguments that may have been overlooked in the article or the editorial. And as you look through letters to the editor in your paper or online, you'll normally, most of the letters are talking about something that was missed or overlooked. A few of them come out of the blue and just talk about something that's happening, but most are in response to an article that was already published. So the reason why we're here is because letters to the editor give us the opportunity to present the faith voice and the moral perspective, which Emma flagged earlier for us. There's many arguments against the death penalty that are entirely secular, and those are great. But you all have kind of a moral high ground that we in the larger movement need you to leverage, and appreciate you using. Um, so when that policymaker sees that letter in the newspaper or online, they know that that one letter writer represents many, many others. And the same is true, as you probably know from your experience, when you maybe go make a visit to a legislator, or you make a visit to the district office of your congressperson. They know you're showing up, but you probably represent many other people in the community holding that same point of view. And some offices have data on how many people each person might represent when they come forward. The great advantage here is when you go and visit an office, or when you write an email to your legislator, that's a somewhat private act. No one else necessarily knows about it. But when you write a letter to the editor, that's a public act for everyone else in the community to see. And that's what's really powerful about it. The legislator knows that this is what people are thinking about. Other people have seen this letter. This is what people are talking about in the district. And of course, they're very, very interested in what are the issues going on in the district. So causing that echo chamber to go on out in public, out among your friends and neighbors through the newspaper or on the website is a very powerful thing to do. So what often comes up, I mean, I was really happy to hear that we had somebody on who got a letter to the editor in the Austin American-Statesman. Obviously, a very big paper in Texas, in the capital, that's a huge deal. But I want to encourage people to think about, you don't necessarily have to get into the biggest paper in the state or in your district, because those staffs who are monitoring letters to the editor, they are looking at all the newspapers and all the websites that people read in the district. So a little paper that maybe only has, a small circulation, that's still going to get in front of the policymaker, and they're still going to know about it. So as some of you have probably experienced, it's easier to get in some of these small papers than it is to get in the big papers. But that's to our advantage, and we should take advantage of going after the small papers. It doesn't matter if you're published in the Wakulla News outside of Tallahassee, which has a circulation of 4,500, or the Zanesville Times Recorder in Ohio with a circulation of 5,200, because that letter is still going to land on the policymaker's desk. Do you want to pop over to our example?
Yes. And I'm going to unmute myself, Margot, and then I'm going to ask you to mute yourself. Okay, just trying to lower the echo. But yes, we have here an example of a really excellent letter to the editor. It's a bit tiny on the screen, so I am going to read it aloud for us, story time, and then Margot is going to break it down for us of why this is such an excellent example. Okay, the Amarillo Globe News. Death row inmate deserves legal, moral justice, by May Hochstein. The Amarillo Globe News editorial, Keep Focus on Justice, April 14th, took the wrong position, legally and morally. Death row prisoner Dwayne Buck was sentenced after his lawyer allowed a jury to be told he poses a greater danger simply because of the color of his skin. There is no crime so great that it overrides our Constitution, which is why Texas agreed to hold new resentencing hearings free of racial bias for 6 other men in the same position. For some unknown reason, Buck is the only one who did not receive a new sentencing hearing. No one is saying that Mr. Buck should be released or punished lightly. The incredible multitude of voices saying he should have a new sentencing hearing free of racial bias, however, includes one of the former prosecutors, a former Texas governor, many people of faith, and legal professionals. Even the surviving victim of the crime does not believe justice requires an execution, but a new sentencing hearing. A committed Christian, such as myself, does not believe justice requires, a committed Christian, such as myself, thinks the power of forgiveness and redemption is paramount. Legally and morally, what happened to Buck was wrong, Texas should give him a new sentencing hearing. The time to evaluate his crime and punishment will be in that hearing, not while arguing about whether or not a new hearing should occur. May Hotchstein, Amarillo.
Okay, so we picked this letter. We think there's no one formula. There's no one thing you have to do. But I really liked this letter, and I wanted us to sort of look at it as a little bit of an example. The most important thing is that your opening really packs a punch, because that's what's going to cause the letters to the editor, the person who makes the decision about whether they're going to publish. We need to grab that person by the lapels and get them to take notice. And that's what's going to happen to the readers as well. And this is just such a strong opening. Their editorial took the wrong position legally and morally. It's just a very strong opening. And it shows what was missing. We talked a little bit a few minutes ago about what's missing from the article. Took the wrong position. I like that in these maybe 2 or 3 sentences, it summarizes the in a very concise, quick way. That way, let's say I didn't see their editorial. Let's say I've never heard of this Dwayne Buck case. I didn't see the original article. I'm up to speed very quickly on these few concise points about the case. What I also like here is no one is saying that Mr. Buck should be released or punished lightly. That's what I call a rebuttal. And some of you who are in a high school debate will remember this term about rebuttal, raising the other side's argument and addressing it and knocking it down quickly, easily. So no one is saying he should be released. The other side acts like we're saying he should be released. That's not what we're saying. No one's saying that. So what we are saying is he has a legal constitutional right to a new sentencing hearing based on the racial bias. What is an important thing that they did here is, and you don't always have to do this, but it's noticeable and powerful that they did this, is this isn't just one person's opinion. Look at the people who agree with me. Look at the multitude of voices. One of the former prosecutors, a former Texas governor, many people of faith and legal profession. Look at all these people. New paragraph sets off by putting it by itself, a 1-sentence paragraph. Even the surviving victim of the crime does not believe that justice requires an execution, but wants to have a new sentencing hearing. So that's just, the person here writing this had some very powerful content to work with, and they used it. And then, of course, and they could have done more with the faith voice if they had wanted to, but they get it in here. As a committed Christian, such as myself, thinks the power of forgiveness and redemption is paramount. So they got the faith voice in there. You'll probably be doing a mixture of some secular arguments, some faith-based arguments. The mix will always vary based on the situation, but this person got it in here very nicely, got in these concepts of redemption, which is so powerful. And even if you're not Catholic, you understand the power of turning your life around. You might still be in prison, but there's always hope for you, for rehabilitation and redemption. So I just think that the way they signed off, the way May signed off here, the time to evaluate all this is at the hearing, which he should be given. We don't have to decide it in the newspaper back and forth right now. We don't decide it right now. We decide it when he has his new hearing. That's the time to decide this. And it's just an eminently reasonable position. It's rooted in the law. It's rooted in the Constitution. It's rooted in faith. It all just makes sense by the time you get to the end of the letter. So that's why we picked that letter. We just really like it. There are certainly plenty of great examples, but this is one we're showing you.
Okay, I'm gonna unmute myself again. Okay, the back and forth muting. Now let's talk a little bit about messaging. Thank you, Margot, for sharing why that was such a great example of a letter to the editor. But as people of faith, as Catholics, and as people who believe in the abolition of the death penalty, what is that unique messaging that we can share in our letters to the editor? And so there are a couple different kinds, or a few examples we'll talk about here. We know that for Catholics and many people of goodwill, the death penalty is unacceptable in all circumstances because it offends the dignity of human life. It is not up to us to take away another person's opportunity for redemption. There are other ways to keep society safe. And we know the death penalty denies Jesus' call to care for the least of these. Capital punishment unfairly targets those with intellectual disability and mental illness, as well as people who are in poverty and marginalized in other ways. In 2018, more than 70% of the people executed showed evidence of serious mental illness, brain damage, intellectual impairment, or chronic abuse and trauma. And for many victims' families, Catholics and non-Catholics alike, taking another life would not help with healing. As Vicky Schieber put it, who lost her daughter Shannon 20 years ago, pursuing the death penalty would not be the way we would want to honor our daughter's life, nor would that decision have helped us heal with the painful reminders of her unfulfilled hopes and dreams. And we know that as long as human beings are in charge, the system will always be fallible. There's always room for error and mistakes. Since 1973, 166 people have been exonerated and freed from death row with evidence of their innocence. Catholics and other people of goodwill cannot tolerate the risk of killing an innocent life. We also recognize that the death penalty system is broken beyond repair. Courts and legislatures have been tinkering with the machinery of death for almost 50 years, but the system has still not gotten it right. It is past time to end capital punishment once and for all. According to a 2014 estimate published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, at least 4% of defendants sentenced to death in the US, 1 in 25, may be innocent. For those of us who value human life, these numbers are, of course, shocking and disturbing. And another thing to consider that a lot of people don't realize is about geography and county resources. Rather than the characteristics of the offender or the crime, geography and county resources play an outsized role in the arbitrary application of the death penalty. A significant majority of executions, more than 85% over the last 5 years, are concentrated in just 5 states. And this next statistic is very shocking. I remember being flabbergasted when I first joined Catholic Mobilizing Network and learned this. 2% of counties make up the majority of the nation's death penalty statistics, according to Death Penalty Information Center. We also know, whether it's concerns about executing the innocent, arbitrariness and unfairness in application, high costs, the lack of evidence that the death penalty deters offenders, or other reasons, the list just goes on and on and on. Americans have grown increasingly uncomfortable with capital punishment. 31 states have abandoned the death penalty through formal abolition, moratoria that put the death penalty on hold, or not carrying out executions for a decade or more. On average, states without the death penalty have lower murder rates than states with the death penalty. A clear majority of voters, 61%, would choose a punishment other than death for the crime of murder, according to a 2010 poll by Lake Research Partners. The 2018 Gallup poll found that fewer than half of Americans, just 49%, believe that the death penalty is applied fairly, the lowest level since Gallup began asking that question. 2018 was the 4th consecutive year with fewer than 30 executions and less than 50 death sentences. This reflects a long-term decline of capital punishment across the US. Continuing to retain the punishment only perpetuates a culture of death rather than life. And lastly, restorative justice seeks to repair the harm caused by crime. This framework helps us envision creative approaches to justice that value human dignity, enable healing, and create space for redemption. The traditional approach to criminal justice focuses on the law that was broken and punishing the person who is guilty. The current system leaves victims out of the justice process and expects them to find their own way to recovery. The death penalty perpetuates suffering and removes any possibility of redemption. The testimonies of murder victim family members show that restorative justice alleviates suffering and redemption is possible, even in the case of grave harm. And in the context of capital punishment, a life sentence or a term of years keeps open the possibility that a victim may choose to pursue a dialogue with an offender, while the death penalty forecloses that choice for victims. That's what we have for messaging guidance. And I know that was a lot, and that was a lot of statistics, but we will have this summarized for you after the webinar. We'll send out a follow-up email with this information. Okay, Margot, I will let you pick it now for tips and placements. Oh, yes, yes, thank you, thank you. I almost forgot. Yes, we have several hooks here that we want to go over that we at Catholic Mobilizing Network, we think there's a lot of things coming up in the news, in our calendar year. There are upcoming executions of things, of topics that you can use as a hook to write your letter to the editor. So if we can just go to that slide with the hooks. Yes. So the first thing we have up on the docket is Respect Life Month, which is in October. This is a great opportunity to raise your voice about, why Respect Life Month is important in terms of the death penalty. The death penalty is definitely an important issue when it comes to talking about our faith and why we're called to be pro-life for all human life. So that's a good one. That's coming up in October. You can start drafting your LTEs now if you would like. And then in October, October 10th, we have the World Day Against the Death Penalty, which is the day, as it implies in its name, that's celebrated all over the world. That's hoping and celebrating the wish for abolition of the death penalty worldwide. We have in December the annual Death Penalty Information Center End of Year Report, or DPIC is what that stands for. Death Penalty Information Center is personally our go-to in terms of the most up-to-date information and statistics and studies around the death penalty. And every year in December, they release their annual report that talks about the trends of the death penalty, execution rates, the latest Gallup poll information, and other good facts that you can pull from. So when that is released, usually it's released in mid-December. You can read it. The CMN always sends out a press release around it, so you can always write an LTE on that. We also have our Advent season. Liturgical seasons are always a good excuse to be talking about the death penalty. CMN, we have our Advent reflections that are released. So maybe you can draw inspiration from one of our Advent reflections that come out every Sunday and write your own letter to the editor around how your Catholic faith and the Advent and Christmas season makes you think about the death penalty. And then we have the resumption of federal executions, the first one being on December 9th, 4 scheduled soon after that. I mean, this would be an excellent time for you to write a letter to the editor around these scheduled federal executions. Another hook we have in January, on January 10th, there's the release of the Just Mercy film based on the book of the same name by Brian Stevenson. And I bet most of you online have read this book, but it's an excellent film around a case of innocence and a man on death row and the story that played out there. But I mean, this movie is expected to get a lot of praise and discussion, so it'd be a very popular one for you to write about. And then we have our legislative sessions coming up across all the states, especially if you live in a state that has viable repeal legislation up for discussion. If you're in Colorado or Utah or Wyoming, especially, just to name a few, you can look at the bills they have posted online and write about why your state needs to repeal the death penalty and why you support these bills. And then we have Black History Month in February. We know that people of color, especially African American men, are disproportionately on death row. That's another good hook. And then we have the Lent and Easter season in February through April of this year. especially if you wanted to write a letter to the editor around Good Friday. The parallels there, I think, are pretty clear. And then, of course, any scheduled state execution, and these are ongoing, unfortunately, throughout the year, around an upcoming execution, especially if you live in that state that has the execution scheduled. The next execution, I believe, is in late September in Texas. That's the next one. So these are some hooks. This is just to get your juices flowing in terms of, well, I want to write a letter to the editor, but I don't know when or why or what about. These are just a few ideas of what you could do.
So what Emma was talking about is we use the term hooks, but it's really opportunities. Like, when are those opportunities going to arise so that your letter answers the question, why now? The editor is always going to know, why am I publishing this now? So your best bet is, as you probably do, because you're active and civically engaged, is to always be following the news and look for those stories that you could potentially respond to. As Emma said, execution dates that are coming up, DPIC's year-end report that has statistics in it. A lot of those statistics can be localized to your state and your community. So just following the news and knowing what's happening on our issue creates lots of opportunities for you to write your letter. On most websites, on most outlets' websites, the email, we're getting down here into the weeds, the email address where you submit your letter is probably going to be on that website. And it's very often letters@baltsun.com or something very obvious like that. But if you're having trouble, you could call us and we'll try to help you find the email address. We can track it down for you. You can always call the newsroom and ask them, and they'll tell you. You want to check the word limit and any submission rules at the paper. They're often posted there. You're going to increase your chances of getting published if you follow the rules. So that helps a lot. So most letters to the editor are very short and concise, and as we saw in the last example, punchy, somewhat punchy. We had a couple of paragraphs there that were a standalone one sentence. Most do not contain more than 3 sentences in each paragraph. The other important thing is, let's say you see this article about an upcoming execution, or you know that December 9th is the day when federal executions are going to be resumed. Respond as quickly as you can. If you see the article in the morning, try to respond as quickly as you can that day, that morning, and not belabor it for several days trying to mull over the perfect sentence, but just try to bang it out quickly. The reason is the letters to the editor who makes the decisions about what goes in and what doesn't is very often going to take the first well-written letter she receives that day, especially if she's looking for letters on that topic. She gets one early at 10 a.m. or 10:30 a.m. and she says, gee, this is good. I can set this one up for publication tomorrow, or I can put it online this afternoon, and then I can take a break because I'm done. So that's part of the flow. Always include your firsthand experiences. Your personal experiences are wonderful to include. Obviously, part of your firsthand experience is sharing your faith and speaking right from the heart. Also, if there are anything that localizes the issue, obviously another example of the death penalty information year-end report has nationwide statistics, but you can also look at that report and break down what's happening in your state, what's happening in your community. DPIC, confidentially, I'll announce it on the on a on this webinar. DPIC is working on updating that study of which counties in the country produce the most death sentences and the most executions, what we call the 2% study from, I think it was last done in about 5 years ago. They're updating it now. So when that comes out sometime this fall, that'll be another opportunity to drill down into your community, your county. Is your county one of the top producers? Or are you near one of the top producers of the death penalty? So after your letter appears, don't assume that the people who need to see it have seen it. We're all in this world here where you get alerts on your phone and the cable is running in the background, and you know, your email comes in, an email alert. All these things are going on. All of our attention is distracted in a million different directions. So don't assume that the people who need to see this have seen it. They're swimming in the same media landscape that we are. So go ahead and you can take the hard copy, clip it right out of the paper, or you can take the link and send it to that policymaker. Send it to the people who influence the policymakers. Maybe it's the bishop, right, who has some influence with that policymaker. Send it to your colleagues, your other volunteers. As far as I'm concerned, send it to your entire list of contacts and tell them about it and ask them to share it.
Yes.
Yes. Post to all your social media accounts. You've got Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, anything you've got. You don't have to have all the platforms, but presumably almost everybody on here is active on at least one platform. Post it there. Ask your friends to share the link. Get it around. And this is what we were talking about earlier. The policymaker is going to stand up and take notice when there's chatter like that in the community. Your letter is being shared, it's being looked at, people are talking about it, and the policymaker is going to know that his or her constituents are discussing this issue, so maybe they should do something about it or be more public about what they do. So that's kind of like the, you know, level 1 stuff about sharing. 2 stuff about sharing is email that link to reporters that may work at your local newspaper. That's going to help keep you top of mind as a resource on the death penalty to your local reporters. Go ahead and try to send the link to a TV or radio producers. And once again, we can help you find those people if you don't know them offhand. Some local communities have podcasts. Pitch yourself as a guest. Hey, we want to talk about the death penalty on your podcast, on your local news analysis podcast. We'd like to be in there. So the letter kind of shows people what you would say if you were going to be interviewed. So that's the world of letters to the editor. And once again, we're talking about 150 words, 200 words, something I think is doable. A lot of you are quite active. There might be folks on this webinar who want to go further than a letter to the editor. And we can try your hand at a full-length opinion editorial or a guest column. Some communities call them viewpoints. It varies. But these are those longer, say 700-word essays that give you more time and more space to explain your opposition. And once again, you would be looking at those same hooks that we went over earlier, but you would just have more space. Did you want to? Oh, and you wanted to offer assistance as well.
Oh, yeah. So I just really want to reiterate to folks that we have on the line that CMN really is here to help you. Whether you have a draft of an LTE and you quickly want to send it to me to look it over, you all have my email address. It's emmat@catholicsmobilizing.org. But seriously, I am more than happy to look over a draft, give you feedback, I'm sure it's great. But we can just offer edits or comments. If you want help placing it or aren't sure of the timing or who to send it to, just let us know. I am really delighted to help with that. Truly, truly. I want to be inundated with letters to the editor in my inbox. And my goal is at the end of the webinar, I would love if we could have like 10 people on the line commit to submitting a letter to the editor, or all of you. I'm up for the challenge. But yes, so thank you, Margot. Really, truly here to help. Okay, so let's dive into the Q&A. We have about 15 minutes for questions, which is perfect. Yes, we will have a copy of the presentation available after the webinar. We will send out a follow-up email next week sometime with everything you need to have. We have a question: which site is a trusted site for stats to add to the letter or respond to an article? Like Margot and I both mentioned, we are huge fans of the Death Penalty Information Center. They really know their stuff. They are devoted to researching the death penalty all across the country and giving us the most up-to-date stats, figures, statistics, analysis as well. Another good resource would be to use your state correctional institution website if you just want numbers on how many people are on death row in your state or when was the last execution. Death Penalty Information Center has that information as well, but your state website should too. So we have another question from Karen. We need to discuss the problems with the federal death penalty. Do we have that information? The short answer is yes. The problems that we see on the federal level are the same problems we see on the state level. Margot, I don't know if you want to say more about that. If something to add.
That is the basic message, that some people are mistaken in that they believe that the federal death penalty is better or more accurate or more fair than what happens at the state level. And the problems we see at the state level are the same problems we see at the federal level. But I think we're going to be able to get you some specific messaging on the federal. And Emma and I can provide that.
Question here, when is a letter to the editor better than an op-ed and vice versa? It's a great question.
I think it's a both and situation. You can, in most cases, you could do one or the other. There's no right or wrong. I personally really like letters to the editor when you want to go quick, when you want to go fast, when you see that article in the morning and you want to rebut it before lunch. 150 words is a heck of a lot easier than 700 or 750 words. So I would never let, sometimes people feel it's daunting to do that longer work. And if you're one of those folks, I would go for the shorter letter to the editor. Both are good, of course, if you're able to do it.
Great. Okay, I know this question says, I know my stance against the death penalty, but what's the best way to talk about the church's stance? Good question. Well, we know, of course, there's the so-called secular argument, which has just the facts of anyone looking at this justice system would see that it's broken beyond repair. We know it's racially biased, it's arbitrary, it targets people who are on the margins of society. It doesn't bring healing. It doesn't offer opportunity for redemption. And then from the faith perspective, you could always quote the new catechism revision that says the death penalty is inadmissible. And there are several other quotes from past popes talking about the church's stance against the death penalty and how, really, even if the death penalty were perfect on a secular level, even if there's no room for error and it was all judicious and not unconstitutional, even then, we as Catholics would be against it because it's taking a human life. So I think that's an important message to keep as well. Would you, Marco, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I defer on that point for sure.
Next question. Okay, the next question. If I write a letter to the editor and follow all the submission tips, what are my odds of getting published? What happens if I don't get published?
That is a great question, and it varies wildly based on where you are. I think what we talked about a little earlier was you obviously have a much, much better chance in some of these smaller papers that are dying for content than maybe some of the more, the bigger papers. I know here where we live, in the big paper is the Washington Post, and there's a 4% chance that your letter will be published. That doesn't sound very good, but that's the Washington Post. So I think you'll do much, much better in your own community at your local paper. Now, what if you write this letter and it doesn't get published? I'm a huge believer in repurposing content. You obviously spent time on this. You polished it up. You checked the statistics. You fact-checked it. Maybe you shared it with your partner to read it over, proofread it. You put some time in here. So what do you do now? Well, you could take that letter and maybe tweak it just a little bit and send it straight to the policymaker. You could take that letter and potentially tweak it just a teeny bit, and that could become a Facebook status. It's still going to be quite relevant on social media. So there are ways to give your letter a second life, even if you don't get it published. And I further point out, if you send in your letter and it doesn't get published, you still have done some very important work in educating the editor that this is still an important issue. Maybe they didn't publish it. Maybe it was a particular season when they were getting lots of letters and they just didn't have room for yours. But you've educated that editor, that newsroom, that this is being talked about in the community. And that's important in and of itself.
Okay, I will unmute myself now for this next question. Okay, are there any states, localities where letters to the editor are most important right now? Yes, I would say any state that has an upcoming execution, which, like I mentioned, that will be Texas near the end of the month. And you can look on Death Penalty Information Center and CMN's website for more upcoming executions. And then in terms of states, I think California, where they announced a governor-imposed moratorium back in March, that's still a really hot topic even a few months later. And then there are a few states that are working on repeal legislation. We have Utah, Colorado, Wyoming. If you are a Catholic in Wyoming, please write a letter to the editor. We don't have a lot of Catholics in Wyoming, so it's so important that we raise our voices in states where the Catholic population might be a little smaller. Utah as well. We're a minority in Utah for sure. But yes, now or Margaret, did you have more to add there?
No, I think that's absolutely right.
Okay. Oh, this is a great question we have from Jen. Can we submit the same or similar letter to the editor to a local newspaper and the local Catholic newspaper, or will most newspapers require it to be an exclusive submission?
That's a really sophisticated question, and I'm glad you asked it. In general, usually, the one outlet would like that letter to be exclusive to them. They'd like to have that fresh content. So if at all possible, submit it to your first choice. And tell them, you can also tell them, I've only submitted this to you. If you don't hear back, if they don't publish it in a couple of days, you can then take it to your second choice. There are times when somebody will blast out a letter to multiple outlets, and it's okay and it works. But in general, most outlets want exclusive content if they can get it.
Great, thank you, Margot. We have another question here. Oh, we have Donna in Terre Haute, Indiana. How can I tie in the federal death penalty in Terre Haute with my state, Indiana, and the executions that will happen in December on the federal level? And for those who don't know, the federal executions will be taking place in Terre Haute, Indiana. Margot, do you think that would be a good idea to tie in a state execution and a federal execution, talking about both at the same time? Or would that be just kicking the bear, so to say?
Kicking the bear means causing something to happen that wouldn't have otherwise happened?
Yes.
Is there, the federal executions are going to occur in Terre Haute? Are there also state executions going on in Terre Haute? Or the fear is that we will stir the pot? Is that the fear?
I think that's the fear. Donna, if you are still on, could you write in a clarification of your question, just so we make sure that we're answering it, we're answering the question.
I mean, I think, yeah.
There are no Indiana ones. There are no state Indiana ones. Yes.
Yeah. I think there's going to be so much attention to the federal death penalty going on in Terre Haute. You're commenting on it and opposing it would not then cause something to happen at the state level, I don't think, because it's out there. This is happening. So we can get out there and oppose it.
Okay, a couple other questions in the chat. Does one need to keep the letter to the editor focused on a specific event or hook? So I guess, is it better to have a really concentrated, specific hook that you're writing about?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think you've only got 150 words. There aren't that many varied topics that you can get in there. You might be using lots of different arguments. You might be mixing in your cost argument and your culture of life argument and your racism argument and your the availability of life without parole is here, so we don't need you might be using lots of arguments, but you really are going to have that one focus. You're going to have that one incident. For example, on the federal death penalty, you'll be saying the federal government should not resume the death penalty, and that's your laser focus. And then you talk about all the different arguments against. But I wouldn't mix two different events going on.
Another question we have from Lonnie. Have you actually heard concretely that staff clip letters to the editor on all issues, or just letters to the editor that name the elected official? So I guess if you're writing a letter to the editor hoping that an elected official will see it, do you need to call out that elected official in your letter?
Which one is this? Oh,
the one from Lonnie.
Okay.
In the chat.
Where's it go? Oh, I get it. Thank you. I know I have worked in a state house, and many of our friends have worked on Capitol Hill, and we will tell you for a fact that there are staff that are clipping these articles. In the old days, we would clip them and staple them together and had to be early and so forth. Now I'm sure it's all done by links. That's all the different types of articles, not just the ones that call out the legislator by name. So I think there are times when it's absolutely appropriate to call out the legislator by name, but you don't have to get attention.
Okay, we are just about at time. I did want to point out a good clarification in our question and answer around Indiana. There's a question around, where in Indiana, where do the executions happen? For the state executions of Indiana, that death row is in Michigan City. Thank you, Karen. And then from Donna, executions happening in Michigan City, Indiana. Yes, but Terre Haute is the federal death row. So I guess there's the possibility of an execution in Indiana soon. Nothing is scheduled as of yet, but I mean, there's always the possibility for sure.
But I don't think speaking out against the federal one will cause the state one to resume. I mean, this is high profile enough that our speaking out is not what it is going to cause new ones to be scheduled.
I think that's right. I think that's just right. Okay, everyone, I think we got to everyone's questions. If not, forgive me, feel free to send me an email for follow-up, and I will get to your question as well. Someone asked me to repeat my email address again. Thank you, Donna. So it's Emma, PEMMAT @catholicsmobilizing.org. And I will be sending you all a follow-up email next week, so you can reply to that as well if you have any following questions. But I just want to say to everyone still with us that thank you so much for participating and for your questions. Really, a webinar is only as good as its participation and questions. So thank you all for making it so rich. And Margot, thank you so much for your expertise and your willingness to be with us today and provide this analysis and letter to the editor training. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I want to say thank you for your work. I know you all are all volunteers. You've got jobs and families and lives, and you still make time to do this life-saving work. So thank you for what you do.
And really, if you guys want to follow up and send me an email saying I commit to writing a letter to the editor, I would love that. And we would love to brag about you on our social media and share any letters you get published there as well. So again, thank you, everyone. Happy Thursday. We have our work cut out for us for sure, but we need your voices. It's crucial. So thank you for your attention.